Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Department Number Two podcast. I am Derek Lindo, and I'm here with Daryl Smith. And today we are going to be having a discussion about some of the books that have been written about the Fort Donelson campaign and talk about which ones are our favorites, what we think about some of them, and which ones that you need for your Western Theater library. Because, Fort Donelson is one of those battles in Fort Henry. It's something we'll be talking about later too. It's something that you definitely need to have a firm grasp on to really understand everything that comes after that. So, Daryl, what do you got for us today?
Well, we're going to start a little bit. I'll kind of ask you about some of the books that you have and what you like, and we can bounce back and forth from there. And I think everything in the Western theater. Well, I guess you could say this about every theater of the war, but everything in the Western theater is really entwined, one way or another.
Right.
This leads to that, which leads to this, which leads to that, and I think Fort Donelson is that the campaign for the forts or the forts campaign starts in Cairo/Cairo. The importance of Paducah and is it Smithland or Smithfield?
Yep.
I always get those mixed up.
Yep. Smithland.
Grant's foray to Belmont, the import or the over importance of Columbus, because let's put 142 guns there and never really use them because it gets outflanked. Way to go, Leonardo's Polk, and
Military genius.
just another feather in that man's cap. You know what I'm saying? Just another feather. But the splitting of the rivers, whoever came up with the idea, right? That's another whole story.
Hmm.
But the splitting of the rivers really just leads to everything else. Now, there are some books, where the South lost the war. That's the subtitle to Kendall Gott's book, which is an excellent book. But
Hmm.
is it really where they lost the war, or is it the first of several points that kind of leads them to losing the war? But I'll pose the first question to you. The first question is, kind of like, what is your? Let's start with your favorite Fort Donelson, Fort Henry book.
Okay. Well, my favorite one I think is one that probably a lot of people have as their favorite, but I got to go with Tim Smith's Grant Invades Tennessee, the 1862 battles for Forts Henry and Donelson. And this came out when? Back was it 2016?
2016?
This
Yeah.
Yeah, this one came out, and it complements his book on Shiloh and then his other book on Corinth. I mean, they all three, even though he jokes how he wrote them in reverse order pretty much, but
Yes.
they they really do complement each other very well. And I mean, the thing I like about his is that it does have a pretty big focus on Fort Henry. It doesn't
Hmm.
just skip over that because there's not a lot of ground fighting there.
Right.
Um, which like if you look in a school textbook, you'll see Fort Henry and Donelson, but you won't really read anything about Fort Henry or the importance of it. You'll read
Mm.
about this victory at Fort Donelson, how it was one of the first ones, but that's really about it. But what I like about Tim's is how he really focuses on the importance of that victory at Fort Henry, what it was, and how it opens up the Tennessee River all the way to Alabama, right into the Deep South. And
Hmm.
but then also like when he gets into the fighting around Fort Donelson, the the tactical level details that he puts in there with I mean, there's so many just diaries and letters and memoirs. I mean, all that stuff that if you want to know what the average soldier was going through, I feel like this is the one because that's how it is in pretty much all of his books.
Sure.
But that's the thing I really love about it. Like, I don't just get what's the general thinking. I get what are the men on the ground going through, what do they experience, and so I think that's why I love to. That's been my favorite one so far.
Yeah. I would concur completely. I mean, there are several titles I really enjoy for different reasons, but I think your summation there is perfect. The importance of Fort Henry, to get us to really understand, that's what changes Albert Sidney Johnston's mind about holding
Right?
Kentucky. It's not Fort Donelson. He
Yeah.
makes the decision to leave Bowling Green after Fort Henry falls.
Yeah.
The night of the 7th, going into the morning of February the 8th, that's when he's made that decision to fall back. And of course, he'll reinforce Fort Donelson. He'll send some troops there as, quote unquote, a delaying action or whatever they were supposed to accomplish. We're not really sure. Um, but as you said, back to the book, Professor Tim Smith has weaved this overarching campaign study with this tactical mixture. The discussion of the actual fighting that takes
Hmm.
place, whether it's on the rivers or whether the Confederate breakout, right,
Yeah.
February 15th, which
Yeah.
has been far too long overshadowed and not interpreted and not preserved like it probably should be, although it's in the process of being rectified slowly but surely. But
Hmm.
if you're going to buy one detailed book, or what we like to say definitive account, right? If
Yeah.
you're going to buy the definitive account, it is Tim Smith's book. It's a University of Kansas Press, I do believe, is how it's read,
Yep.
or University of Kansas Press or publication. Like Derek said, it's 2016, so it's definitely in print, and it does. If you've read his Shiloh works or Corinth, or Champion Hill.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
that's right. So it is in that mold or that mode of writing. It's just a fantastic writer. I mean, just
Right.
there are two authors there are several authors in the Western theater, but there are two that I've really enjoyed. Um, Tim Smith being one of them, Dave Powell being the other one, because
Yeah.
it's not just the same story over and over again. These are guys who go in deep dive and then come up with their own theories or direction towards battles. And again,
Hmm.
to reemphasize, Tim's emphasis on the fall of Fort Henry can never be overstated.
Right.
Can never be overstated. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's one. And now keep in mind, this is a hardback book. This is a several hundred page one, over
About
500
400.
pages, including the
Yeah.
index. So it's a
Yeah.
big one. So if that's not your cup of tea, what else might we suggest, Derek? What else do you have on your pile or your list?
Well, there was one that I was really not familiar with until I was at the I can't remember what it's actually called, but the Civil War show in Franklin back in the winter.
Hmm.
And there's a man there that was selling some used books, and I just happened to see the Battle of Fort Donelson, and I was like, I would like to check that one out. It's by a man named James Hamilton, and it turns out it is the first full book length account of this whole campaign, published in 1968. And from what I've been able to find, the author James Hamilton just says he was majored in history, and he's a school teacher from Ohio, which sixth grade teacher from Lakewood, Ohio, from 1968. That I haven't really been able to find anything else. If he ever wrote anything, I haven't been able to find it. But for the very first book that was actually written on Fort Donelson, it's not bad. I mean, it's not the best thing I've ever read, but at the same time, he talks about the importance of Fort Henry and how Albert Sidney Johnston began the evacuations after the fall of Fort Henry. He talks about how Albert Sidney Johnston never went to these forts to see them for himself, and lays a lot of that blame on Johnston and how his orders are kind of confused. Um, this is not a one of those deep tactical studies like what you would find with Tim Smith. It's very much from the brigade up, and every now and then you mention a regiment. Uh,
Hmm.
it's but I mean, it's for somebody. If this was going to be, if you had to read an introduction to this battle and this campaign, this is one that I think I might go with. I mean, when I'm looking at it, the text itself is 340ish, 350 pages.
Hmm.
But the text on the pages is not small. You'll fly through it very quickly. And like I've been reading it during my lunch breaks at school, and I've been went through it really quick. But it's for an introduction. It's good. I
Yeah.
might even recommend somebody start off with this. You kind of get the overarching themes. You get your basic understanding of the battle. Then, with that knowledge that you already have, you can go in and tackle something a little bit more complex, a little bit more deeper, and fine tune your understanding. This is the milk, baby milk. Tim Smith's is the steak, I would say. Um, but it's good. I'd recommend it. It's only I've looked it up, and you can find it on Amazon and stuff for a few bucks.
Yeah.
It's not expensive.
Amazon,
Um,
eBay. I've seen,
yeah,
yeah, it's definitely aftermarket because you said what, 68, 1968.
yeah,
So
1968.
it's
Yeah,
it's not in print, but
I was
I've
lucky
seen
enough to find
several
this original
copies.
version.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, I think there's only one version, so I think the original
Yeah,
is
I think
the
so.
is the one.
There was no second
Um,
version, but I mean, there's a few things that I'm not a fan of. surprisingly, Gideon Pillow does not come out as a complete idiot like we typically know him. He
Well,
kind of he kind of gives him he's in a more positive light here.
mhm,
And Grant, kind of in a I don't know. He's not that friendly towards Grant, which you mean you don't have
yeah,
to, but um, that part kind of surprised me. And then I have some qualms with the maps. I mean, the maps are from the 1960s. You got your
mhm,
X's and O's on the map. That's what it
yeah,
is. It's not difficult. It's not easy to figure out things. You can tell where some ridges are in the creeks, but he doesn't list regiments. Usually, it's usually just the division. So you'll see
mhm,
McClernand, and you got all these X's, and then you see Smith, and you have all these X's, and Wallace, and all these X's, and stuff like that. And um, which it is what it is, you know. Um, and then a couple other things, just reading, just I guess the style wise, which isn't the biggest thing for me, but you'll be reading a paragraph about what the Union Army is doing, and then suddenly, very next paragraph, it'll start talking about Floyd and the Confederates for one paragraph, then jump back to the Union. So
a little
that
disjointed.
at times, it gets kind of you're like, okay, what was where'd this come from? And sometimes he'll use like a minor person's name, like some brigade commander on the Confederate side that's not very well known. You're like, okay, I need to remind myself who that person was again. But
Mhm.
he does that one thing that you love, Daryl. He'll use the rank and full name
Oh,
throughout the
that's
book
a
at times.
that's a killer.
Yeah,
You know, God
it's
love
not,
the
and it's not all the time. It's just every now and then you'll see General John McClernand, and you're like, just say
it's like
McClernand.
you're
A few
300
paragraphs ago,
pages
you
in,
said
you pretty
McClernand.
much know who McClernand is by that point, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
You
it
know,
is.
our our good friend, and I say that in jest, I say good friend because the amount of ink that Dr. Haffendorfer wrote on
Yeah,
Kentucky stuff is amazing, and thank God he did. But he was notorious for putting full names and ranks and company and regiment over and over again, sometimes within the same paragraph. It's like, I get it. I know who you're talking about, right? And that, you could probably cut the book length in half and the cost by a third, but that's yeah, that one gets a little rough. That gets a
yeah.
little rough. So again, Hamilton, I've looked him up. You can find him on Amazon. That book on Amazon. You can find him on find it on eBay. It's one I don't have. I had heard, and I do not remember who said it. I don't know if it was like a Greg Biggs or somebody had mentioned that the breakout coverage in Hamilton's book is supposed to be fairly decent.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
it's
Okay.
good. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's the way he writes it is. I mean, he's a good writer. I mean,
Okay.
just the way he explains things, it's like you. I mean, it sucks you in. Um, but besides the jumping back and forth between sides, paragraph to
Hmm.
paragraph, besides that, I mean, yeah, the breakout part is really good. I
Okay.
really enjoyed that part.
Well, I'm glad this will get aired after I've had a chance to pick up my copy,
Yeah,
just to make sure I can get a copy for a reasonable price before the run on James Hamilton's book goes crazy and tens of copies are sold across the world. So
tens of copies. Yep.
tens of copies. So.
So, Daryl, which one is which is your go to?
Well, Tim Smith is definitely my go-to.
Hmm.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, again, that's the definitive account. It will set the standard for decades to come, most likely. But I'll talk about the first one that I actually picked up, and that was Benjamin Franklin Cooling's Forts Henry and Donelson, The Key to the Confederate Heartland. And
Hmm.
this was the first Henry Donelson book that I've had. I've had it obviously for a number of years, probably shortly after it came out. It was published in 1987
Yep.
and University of Tennessee Press, Knoxville. I don't know if it's still an actual publication, but it is easy to find on the aftermarket. I
Yeah.
see it everywhere.
Yeah.
This is a great book.
Cooling. He
You
was
know,
the park historian, wasn't he, for Fort Donelson?
yeah, he was down there. I don't know his relationship down there,
Yeah,
to be perfectly
park
honest.
historian at Fort Donelson National
Oh, there
Military
it
Park
is. Okay,
from
well that might explain.
62 to
He
63.
was he was just there for a season or two.
Yeah.
But he would write articles because I've come across some magazine articles and things that
Hmm.
he'd written, and then he puts out this book. And I've had my copy for a number of years. I got a little foxing going on top. I can already see. But it's been one I've had for a number of years. It actually took me 2 attempts to actually read it, because it starts a little. I don't want to use the term dry because it's too harsh,
Yeah.
but it did start a little, well, a little dry for me, and so it took, I kind of set it aside, then went back to it. The level of his effort here, um, it is definitely at a higher level because he's looking at things, social, political, economic
Hmm.
ramifications, et cetera, et cetera. So, he's looking at things higher. It doesn't mean he doesn't take care of covering the force. He absolutely does.
Hmm.
Um, he doesn't use X's and O's like the Hamilton maps, but his maps are pretty basic. Um, Mostly at the brigade level. There's some regimental level, but you don't really see what the name of a regiment. You just see these, rectangles.
Yeah.
So it's pretty basic there. Not enough maps. I think that's always my argument for every book I
Yeah.
ever
Give
read.
us more.
Just not enough maps. I need more maps, right? So it's not quite enough maps, but this one set the standard, and I think still does from the higher level operational. Again, the other impacts that we don't necessarily always think about is this particular book. So this is still, to me, a very worthy effort, or worthy book to pick up and put on your Fort Donelson, Fort Henry
For sure.
bookshelf. I it's well written. Like I said, it started for a little dry for me. I think at the time I tried to read it was a number of years ago, and maybe I wasn't also as well versed as I needed to be, as a reader, right? As an actual
Hmm.
reader, I think there's something to that. So, but it's not necessarily my go-to. But if you wanted one book that kind of covered this at a higher level with some granularity, Cooling's book is a good place to, would be like the one book perhaps.
Yeah. And
If Smith's 500 plus pages are intimidating, Cooling's 350 might be a little bit more,
yeah.
in your wheelhouse. So
Yeah. And I just looked up one of those maps, and yeah, it's you get the basic rectangles of divisions and maybe a
yes,
couple brigades sprinkled in
yeah,
there.
you're getting some
Uh,
brigade commander names in there.
yeah.
Um,
I want to see where those regiments are at. That's what I like
yeah,
seeing.
well, and you and I are like that. Like we like the tactical too, right? Like
Yeah, because several times during
like,
this
write it
battle,
down by company for me. I'd love that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, the more detail, the better. Like so many times during this battle, the brigades were not in a straight line,
No.
like what they're showed on the maps. Like these regiments, some were. I mean, the way they were getting bent back on each other and having
Hmm.
to refuse their flanks. I mean, it was pretty a lot of movement going
Yeah.
on during that breakout,
Well, just a lot
especially.
of chaos, right? This is
Yeah,
this is one of the, well, it's the first large battle in the Western Theater.
yeah,
Obviously, I'm stopping at the Trans Mississippi because you already have Wilson's Creek in 61, and Mill Springs is a small affair. I'm sorry, it's a couple
it's
brigades on each
two
side.
brigades. Yeah,
Yeah, everything else up to that is pretty small in the
hmm
West. So this is the first large battle. I mean, you've got Grant with, he'll wind up with over 20,000 men, and the Confederate side, I don't know, 15, 16, 17,000, depending on
yeah,
what source you're looking at. So these are, this is some of the largest stuff that's going on in the Western
yeah,
Theater. And I've said this before, if Shiloh doesn't happen 7 weeks later, I think Fort Donelson is a much larger national battlefield.
for sure. Yeah,
And who knows? I mean, it could have been one of those first generation battlefields,
yeah,
saved in the 1880s, 1890s,
yeah.
which also could have meant that Fort Henry would still be there,
Right, and not
because the
under
flooding of the
war.
Kentucky Lake doesn't happen until what, the 1930s. So
Yeah,
who knows, right? Great what ifs of life. All right.
yeah.
So what else do you have on your
Well,
Henry Donaldson pile?
so I just speaking of Cooling wrote another book about not
Oh,
just the
yeah.
Fort Donelson
Yes.
campaign as we know it, but what is going on in this area after the fall of Fort Donelson. And it is the way it will open up your mind to things in the Western theater and what's going on in this part of the war like nothing else. And it's called Fort Donelson's Legacy.
Yeah.
And when I was researching my own book, it was that book. I had so many post-it notes in it. I had a lot of things, a lot of dog-eared pages because I mean, it had so much to do with what I was talking about in my book, um, and Dr. Cooling, he read mine. He was one of the first people to read it a few years ago to give me some feedback, and I mean, the feedback he provided was invaluable, and I think definitely made it better than what it originally was. But yeah, the not necessarily about the February. 1862 actions, but
Right.
you'll get stuff in there about the things that are going on in August and September in that area in 1862, and then even in 1863. So definitely pick that one up too. It's not you're not going to get the grand campaigns, any grand battles. You get a lot of skirmishes, a lot of raids, and a lot of just the guerrilla activity that was just
Hmm.
pervasive down there in that area. But he also talks a lot about the social economic stuff too.
Hmm.
He's good about entwining that into the story as well. So it's not just a military history. I mean, he's bringing in stuff about what are the people themselves experiencing and going through, which is it's a nice touch and it's a nice change.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. Again, you can, I don't know if it's currently in print, but it is definitely available
Hmm.
after
Yeah,
markets.
yeah, for sure.
And the prices range. I've seen ridiculous prices on it, but then I've also seen some relatively affordable ones. So
Yeah, I ordered mine several years ago and it
yeah.
showed up without a dust jacket. So it's just
Oh,
the
well, I will say
plain.
mine showed up with a dust jacket, so I do
Yeah,
have
mine
that.
mine
So
did not. So I might have to
yeah.
fix that one day. But
And I will, not to go to the Eastern Theater, but Dr. Cooling also wrote a third book that I know
he
of,
did.
and that's on the Battle of Monocacy. It
Yeah,
is fantastic.
yeah.
Well, it's not just Monocacy; it's Jubal Early's entire raid. So,
Hmm.
64. So good stuff there. He's a great writer.
Right.
Like I said, it took me. I think when I was too young to appreciate. I think I was part of it when I first read it, first tried to read it, and
Hmm.
so yeah, I enjoy that book
Yeah.
greatly. All right. Let's see where I want to go next. All right. Kendall Gott. Let's do
Hmm.
that one.
Okay.
I think it's one you mentioned that you don't quite have yet.
Yeah, I don't have that
So,
one. That has
so
been
I will
on
say
my ordered
shame
list.
and boo to you,
I
right?
know it's
Um,
almost I feel like I should walk, like on Game of Thrones where they're shaming her as she's going through and everyone's
yes.
just yelling
Yeah,
shame
you
at her.
should.
Yeah.
You should. Now you can shame me because I've never watched Game of Thrones. So there's
Oh.
also that. So yeah.
Well, the way it
Um,
ended, you didn't really miss anything, but yeah. That's another conversation.
Yeah. So I really enjoy Kendall's Got book, and to me, and I may or may not be describing this quite right, and unfortunately, it's actually in the other room, so I'm not going to give you a whole. Well, you know what? This if only we had a device that we could look up things, and that knowledge would come to us just instantly through the Ethernet.
Is
That would
it the
just be
Google?
so fantastic, right? Wouldn't that be great if that could
Yeah, that
happen?
would be a great,
I'll pull up the deets here, right? That's what the cool kids say, the deets, right? I'll pull up the deets
not
here
really
and give you.
anymore. Yeah,
Not
that's,
anymore.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'm old,
the
so there's
that Gen
that.
Z language is, I almost need to translate it for myself anymore.
So, I'm putting this bad boy up on pulling this up on Amazon right now. It's called "Where the South Lost the War: an analysis of the Fort Donelson campaign, February 1862." I do believe it is, yeah, a Stackpole book,
Mhm.
380 pages. It's a paperback. It is definitely still available. You
Is
can
that
get that
early
bad boy.
2000s?
2011 is what this one says.
Okay.
Sometimes it was a reprint. Yeah, this says July of 2011. This book to me, I really enjoy. I'll get my picky out right now.
Okay.
And if the good if good Mr. God is listening, I'll extend my apologies right now. But the
I mean,
maps,
everyone has
just
their
all
pickiness about a book, you know?
oh yeah. And for me, again, going back to the map comments, right? The maps aren't bad, but the symbology that he's using, you can tell he's definitely using someone I think I think didn't he teach out at Leavenworth for a bit or something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So you can see there's some symbology there that's probably more related to army symbology in a way.
Mhm.
I wish the maps were a little bit better. They're good. They're solid. You can follow along. That's all excellent. But just wish they were a little bit better in terms
Yeah.
of common course symbology for the rest of us. But this book to me, and I think it's an expansion upon like a paper he had written on Confederate High Command, which I also have as some sort of weird reprint because some of the passages are verbatim. Um, so, um, so kind of going back to the latter is his focus is on more command and command decisions. Um,
Yeah.
so he fits right between Cooling and Smith. That's how I look at it, and a little more about what's going on from a decision points along the way, and getting you more looking at it from a command level. Doesn't mean he doesn't cover the fighting. He certainly does that. Absolutely does that. And it's a well written book. I enjoy it
Mhm.
greatly. my trilogy is Smith, Cooling, and Gott. I mean, if you're going to buy 3 books, okay,
Yeah.
there you
Yeah.
go. You're going to get kind of a weaving of all levels there. But I highly recommend Kendall's book, Mr. Gott's book. I don't know the man. I shouldn't use his first name. Mr. Gott's book. And like I said, it's readily available for very affordable prices.
And
And
he's
like I
looks
said,
like he's
380.
got another thing out here. It's about 100 pages. Came out in 2015, and it's called "The Confederate Command During the Fort Henry Fort Donelson
Yeah,
Campaign,
that's
February
that's what I
1862."
alluded to. That's
Yeah.
what he pulled. That was actually written well before 2015,
Hmm.
but somebody published it in 2015. Because when you look at it, it's like this self-published kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, but those passages that are in that, there's a lot of them that have been
Yeah.
added or used in his actual real quote unquote real book.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's that. But that command, if you want to pick that up, because it's an oversized paperback. Uh, it's kind of neat, but you're going to get a lot of the same repetition
Hmm.
that you already receive in his Where the South Lost the War. And there's an argument to be made there, right? Like
Yeah.
even the title, Where the South Lost the War. Well, yeah. Again, I'm more of the it's a point, right? It's one of
Hmm.
those turning points, or something like that, because it's not that many months later in August and September of '62 that the Confederacy's riding their high tide, and they win a couple battles, and then things flip, right?
Yeah.
If they win at Antietam, if they well, they do win tactically at Perryville too, but they don't hold Kentucky. I mean, there's a lot of changes potentially happen.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those points. Yeah, but regardless, it's a good book. I highly recommend that one.
Yeah.
Stackpole still available, easy to obtain. So, all right, you got to have another on your pile somewhere, right?
Yeah. I think
I've
it's
been,
by this
I've
guy
been by
named.
Fort Donelson. I've
Yeah, I
been
was gonna say I
more than
think about this
yours,
guy
I
named
bet.
By Daryl Smith about the tablets of Fort Donelson, right?
That dude is a hack. I'm telling you that right now.
Yeah, just a jerk, man.
As I sip my alcoholic beverage and chuckle a little bit.
So yeah,
Yeah,
so tell
well,
us about that though.
well, okay. My first visit to Fort Donelson, geez, oh Pete, was that 2016, something like that? 2015, 2016. I actually went down there for a backpacking trip. So I backpacked along the Telegraph Road. I backpacked part of the road that kind of leads Paytona Furnace, and so I did a backpacking trip with then, of course, the mission of going to visit Fort Donelson a little bit. So I
Mhm.
hiked a lot of the trails there, and I don't know what it is about Fort Donelson. I think small towns always grabbed me as well, right?
Mhm.
I think that's part of it. And again, not a lot of it is preserved and interpreted, probably is it well way that we feel like it should
Yeah.
be. And
Yeah.
and I know the park's working diligently to continue to increase interpretation.
Mhm.
Um, but there's something that gravitates to me. So, the little side group, I've been attending this Chickamauga seminar in the woods for, I think this year was my 12th or 13th. So been doing that for a lot of years, and I've met some good people along the way. And so we sometimes tour on the side. And so a few of us got together in 2017, I believe. And we got together, we hiked the battlefield. So Pat McCormick and Dave Powell and Andy By God Papin, if you're listening. We had a great time. But as we're walking the trails and reading the War Department tablets, because again, you're not going to get this monumentation at Fort Donelson. There's only 2 monuments on the entire battlefield.
Yeah, it's
One's the
it's not Shiloh.
ubiquitous, no, it's not.
Yeah.
One's the ubiquitous Texas monument, right, that we see up
Mhm.
at a lot of battlefields
Everywhere.
now.
Yep. Everywhere.
And then the other one's the Confederate monument that the Daughters of the Confederacy raised funds and had built there in the park proper.
Mhm.
But we're walking and we're reading these War Department tablets, and like you're reading the text, but the text didn't follow. It didn't make sense to where you're standing on the ground in some cases. In some
Yeah.
cases,
Yeah.
and that just of course you're later at night you're having your bull session, you're sitting back and having your frosty alcoholic beverage or whatever it may be. So you're having these conversations, and so something just didn't sit right. So I went back down the next year to do research. I reached out to the park and asked them what they had, and specifically on the War Department tablets, and they're like, "Yeah, we got a file." And I'm like, "Okay." And then they shared with me a PDF too, and the PDF was the text of every tablet that was established by the War Department in the late 1920s and early 1930s.
Hmm.
And so now I'm starting to look at those, and I go, well, wait a minute, there's a lot more tablets here than what is on the park property. So then I went down, did some research, and then I hiked I've hiked every trail down there a few different times, to get pictures, to notate their locations, and to determine what was quite going on. Well, at that point, there were 13 tablets actually missing, and several of them are actually in the wrong location. As the years have gone by, since they were installed in the early 1930s, things happen, right? Neighbors, property, whatever, and so some of them have been moved. So even some of the ones on the breakout along the Wind
Hmm.
Ferry Road,
Yeah.
they're not where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to take this text that they were gracious enough to provide me with, and I'm going to have some maps made. Thank you, Mr. Ed Alexander, for doing that, for Make Me a Map. There's a shameless plug. Maybe again, sponsorship. We need to get some
He did my
sponsorship.
maps for my book, and
Oh,
I love them.
there's some good stuff there.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff there. Yeah, he's good. Um, and so, and then I try to figure out where, I had the original 1928 or whatever the year is, the original map, like in electronic format. So I
Hmm.
knew where the tablets were supposed to be and where they initially were installed.
Hmm.
And boy, you want to talk about some differences. There's a lot of
Yeah.
differences there. And so I put that together, and got to have a picture of every existing tablet and maps where they were, where they should be, and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And so it's just been fun, to be
Yeah.
blatantly honest with you. I've revamped it a couple times. I might do one more version of it where I add in some troop movement maps and a couple other little things
Hmm.
that need to be tweaked a little bit, and then I'm going to try to step back from that project. But I've had some nice feedback from folks at the park. Every now and then I'll donate a few copies to the park. And I was in there I was in here last year. I was leading a tour, as a matter of fact. My wife and I went down. We led a tour. The Battlefield Trust put us in touch with a couple from England who was coming over to
Oh,
tour,
neat.
and so I went down there and did my first Fort Donelson tour. And I stopped into the visitor center there and handed them a stack of these books as a donation. And the ranger's like, "Oh, can you sign this?" And it's the first time I've ever signed a book.
Your
And I
autograph,
thought
please.
it's weird. Like, what that is, I said, you don't want to devalue the value of that, right? But they use it. That's the thing. I've had the Rangers, I've had some of the staff reach out and say, we use this. Like when
Yeah.
somebody, reaches out and says, hey, unit, or where do I find, they'll pull that out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice. It's, a little vain or ego, but it was a fun project. It is not what I would call an essential Fort Donelson book in any way, shape, or form. It is not a tour guide in any way, shape, or form. That might be another topic for another day.
Another
But
day.
it's yeah. So, but it was just fun. So I appreciate you bringing it up. But that was really a wasted segment just there. Can we
Yeah.
edit that one out?
You tens of people that are listening. Maybe he'll have tens of orders suddenly flow in.
Well, don't buy what you see on Amazon. That is an old version, crappy maps that I made on Google. Go to lulu.com and just search Fort Donelson and you will find it. It pops right up. So lulu.com, and it's relatively affordable. I think I got like a $12 or $13 price tag. It's
Is it?
100 pages softbound. So
Yeah, it's the number one ranked tablets, the Fort Donelson book on there, isn't it?
yes, it is. It's
Yeah.
also the last ranked tablet of the Fort Donelson book. So it's the first and the last. So all right, you smarty pants. I'm gonna switch gears on you a little bit.
Okay. Okay.
Still with the Fort Donelson stuff, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Obviously. So I picked up one. This is a new addition to the Fort Donelson, the ink that's available in Fort Donelson. And it is called the River Batteries at Fort Donelson.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Construction, armament, can't speak today, and battles, 1861, 1862. It's written by M. Todd, I'm going to say Cathy, maybe it's Cathay, and Ricky W. Robnett. This is a McFarland book, so those of us who know McFarland, we know that unfortunately it's pricey, but this McFarland does us a good service. So they're one of those publishers that help get a lot of odd topics published, I
Yeah.
think, and
Yeah.
so and very limited print runs,
Hmm.
and so the price they are pricey. It's a softback book. Let's take a look here. It was 2021 is when
Yeah.
it was put out. It is 179 pages. It is an ungodly deep dive into the river batteries at Fort Henry.
Yeah, that's a lot to
Everything
work
you
with.
want to know, down to gun tube numbers and the whole gamut,
Yeah.
are in here. Now, again, it also has a bit of a history to it.
Hmm.
So there's a little bit of history going along in here. But the real, well, actually, there's a lot of history here. But a big focus is obviously the armament and the functionality of those river batteries.
Hmm.
And um, yeah, I picked it up. This is like, you got to be just goofy to get this one. Like, you have to love Fort Donelson and just can't get enough. Because again, it's got a hefty price tag on it. It's probably $30 for this 178 page softback. It might even be more now.
If you're writing a book
Most
on Fort
recent,
Donelson, that might be one to pick up. If
yeah,
there's
yeah. If you're
somebody
going to
out
write
there
a
that's thinking about
detailed
doing it.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's well done.
Hmm.
Kudos to the authors. Had no idea anybody was even doing anything like this until I came across it. So a little bit of an obscure title. I wouldn't call it essential, but we didn't say this was an essential. We're just talking about books about the
It's a good
campaign
addition.
tonight.
Yeah.
But it is definitely a good addition if you're into the obscure. So, all right, bouncing it back to you.
Well, there's I guess besides the secondary sources that have been written, I mean, you can't go wrong with looking at some of the primary sources. And
Hmm.
so, I would, as when we were talking about the other day, you wrote the blog post on essential Fort Donelson books. And, I think definitely someone mentioned, well, what about the ORs? Well, I think that's
Hmm.
if you're going to study any battle, that's where you start. And
Sure.
that's, if you're, I should reframe that. If you're going to be writing about any battle, I think or researching, you've got to start there with the primary sources. The OR is probably the best place to start, I think.
Hmm.
And see what these guys are saying that were there.
Hmm.
You might get some contradictions, because
Yes.
just because it's a primary source does not mean that it is correct 100%. I mean, these guys are focusing on what's in front of them. Sometimes, I mean, do you really want to believe everything John McClernand wrote in his report?
Well, he believed it. So
Yeah, he did. He thought he was
he
the
believed it.
hero. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, start there. You'll get a lot of good stuff. Even down to the regiments. Um, finding Colonel Hanson's Second Kentucky Confederate side there. His report is great, seeing how they were moving around and stuff
Hmm.
like that. Which is for me, I love looking at that kind of stuff. So if you don't have the cash on hand to order one of these books, the ORs are free online. You can find them.
Yes.
They're searchable. You go to the right volume and just start scrolling through or searching for a
Yep.
name or a regiment, whatever it is you're looking for, and there's a good chance you can find something that's in there.
Hmm. And
Um,
it's volume 4 that covers
yeah,
this campaign. So, volume 4, and I didn't include it in the essential. For the essential, I was pretty much trying to do for that blog post,
yeah,
readily available in print, like
right,
currently being published.
yeah,
But you can find ORs for anywhere from $10 to $20 if
hmm,
you're diligent and patient, per issue,
per volume,
per
I
book,
guess.
I
Yeah, per
guess.
book. Yeah,
Yeah, per book. So you can be patient, and volume 4 is fairly common, so that's one that you should be able to find for a decent price. I keep in mind, like Derek alluded to higher level leaders, you often can take what they say with a grain of salt.
hmm,
It's the regimental commanders that are writing. They're not always writing with an agenda,
yeah,
so they're covering a little bit more of troop activity, and probably being a little more true to the heart
yeah. And,
than
and
some
those
of the
upper
higher
level
level
guys,
guys.
they're not everywhere at once, so they're
Right.
not seeing the entire thing. But the regimental guys are seeing exactly what's in their front up to a
Yeah.
few hundred yards. So
Yeah.
that's definitely check out those regimental guys. I mean, they're in newspaper accounts. I mean, so the 17th Kentucky, which you probably know, is one of those regiments that I just love looking up those guys. They're local, and
Hmm.
where our new house is going to be, I have already found several 17th Kentucky headstones within a mile of where the house is, and so I'm pretty excited about that among my people now, and so but so I guess about 2 or 3 years ago, I was looking up just some stuff about them at Fort Donelson because I read the reports, and I guess I was just a little disappointed. I mean, they weren't the most detailed.
Mhm.
There's a diary of a guy that was there, Sam Cox. He was a sergeant. Eventually, became commands a company in the regiment. But Fort Donelson, he's just a sergeant, and that's the diary that I've posted on the blog. That
Yeah.
he's uh, where he says that morning he wishes he was a home guard and not in the middle of
Yeah.
all that. Um, but yeah, I mean his account, but you don't get the whole thing for the 17th Kentucky because he's sent to go send a message to the 25th Kentucky and gets lost. And and then once he finds the 25th, he ends up spending the rest of the day and night with that regiment. So I don't know what the heck the rest of the 17th Kentucky was doing the rest of the day from that
Okay.
perspective, but I found
Mhm.
a newspaper account and it gives some amazing details. And I need to that one's on my Kentucky blog that I'm slowly starting to shift over to the Western Theater. I need to shift that one. Maybe I actually did. Actually, no, scratch that. It is on the Western Theater. I put it there first. So it's
Yeah.
on there too. That newspaper account it's really interesting and a lot of details about a field hospital and just those little things that I didn't get in the reports, but written by somebody who was there is it's great.
Yeah.
So what else we got on Fort Donelson?
Well, I still have a stack, so I
Yeah, let's
think
go
I'm
through
more
it.
of a collector for Fort Donelson that you
Yeah.
might be. And again, it's this strange affinity that I have for that place.
Yeah, I mean, my affinity for Fort Donelson has grown the last few years. Shiloh is
Yeah.
that's that's I think I got just about everything on Shiloh. I think so, but yeah. What else you got?
But Fort Donelson is your closest national battlefield,
It
right?
is, yeah, yeah,
Ironically, it's also mine by about 30
yeah,
minutes over Chickamauga,
and
Chattanooga.
it's one of the
So,
first ones. I think it's the first national battlefield I visited. I think back in 2004 when I was in high school. I
mhm,
was with we did a reenacting event in Land Between the Lakes there, and I think we were the portraying the 83rd Illinois, and I mean that was my first taste of the um, really really authentic side of the hobby, I guess. But afterwards, we went to Donelson. And all we looked at though was the kind of the river batteries.
mhm.
Went into the fort like the river batteries. Didn't look at anything of the outer works or where that land that the park now owns for the breakout. But that's all I saw. And then I guess 2 years later in 2006, we went back, and there was supposed to be a living history there. And this is in February. It's on the anniversary in February, and so I checked out of school early and started going down with me and my friend. And this is before we just pull out the cell phone and check out what the weather's going to be down there. Which little did we know that a massive snowstorm was coming and that the event had been canceled. So we drive down there. The weather is, I mean, it's perfect, which is eerily similar to 1862. And we're thinking, man, this is nice. And so we go into we drive into the park. We park right by that that soldier cabin there, that winter quarters cabin, and
Mhm.
thinking, where's everybody at? Nobody's here. And we did not know that the storm was on the way. So we unload the truck and make ourselves comfortable inside that. We also found out later you're not supposed to stay in there.
No,
But for that
no,
night,
yeah.
we did. And I remember a cop came up and we were looking through the cracks in the wood there. And I was like, oh, there's a cop looking in the truck. And we go, hey, we're down here. And he's like, oh, okay. Well, good luck tonight. Okay. Like, that's weird. And so, um, that's kind of weird. So we don't light a fire because we are afraid we would burn the thing down.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we go fireless in that thing. We're trying to really connect with those guys from February '62. No fire. And I remember I wake up in the middle of the night and snow had come in through the cracks, and there is snow on top of my blanket, and my feet were just absolutely frozen. And I was like, I can't move. And so we were looking at neither one of us were sleeping, and we're like, you know what? If they can do it back then, we can do it too. And so we just are determined we're going to tough it out, even though this is a miserable and stupid thing to do. And eventually, though, I guess about 5 o'clock in the morning, we were both kind of like, you know, go to the truck. Like, yeah, let's go to the truck. So that we could thaw our feet out. And we found out the next day in the visitor center. We mentioned, hey, it was really cold in that cabin last night, and they were not quite happy that we had spent
No, I
the night
bet they
in there.
weren't.
Yeah, not at all. But I can say I spent the night in that thing in February, and the snow came down, and that was an experience. So
Uh,
Yeah, that's
did you
my
write a book on
Donelson
that? Did we?
early days.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Derek's Fort Donelson campaign book.
Yeah, they're going to, next time I come in, they'll have my picture up in there and say, "This guy's
Well,
not allowed anymore."
it actually is in there.
Yeah,
I
oh,
didn't have to
okay.
hardly tell you. Yeah, well, be on the watch for this guy.
Yeah,
So. All right, I've got a few titles I'm gonna blow through here real
okay.
quickly because we always plan to make these kind of short, like our intro was going to be short and it
That never
wasn't.
happens, does it?
It never happens.
No.
But hey, as long as those tens of people are listening, thank you for
Yeah,
doing that.
yeah,
Anybody wants to sponsor, we accept what Civil War books,
sure, yeah.
but titles that we
Coffee.
select,
I'll
right?
take coffee
Right.
too,
Oh, coffee. Yeah.
yeah,
All right. Well, that works. If you're looking for one book to buy that's a little more affordable, that's a little easier to read. And I say easier, not because those other books that we mentioned aren't easy to read, but just like, I don't know, it's like an introduction. And that would be James R. Knight's The Battle of Fort Donelson, No Terms But Unconditional Surrender. Excuse me, this is a history press book. It was part of their Civil War
mhm,
sesquicentennial series. This came out in, should have had that ready for you folks, 2011. It's 180 pages. No, it's less than that. I lied. It's like 160, 170 pages. Um, and it's just a real, easy account that goes
mhm,
through. Now, he does cover the importance of Fort Henry in here, which
yeah,
was nice to see. But it's a real simple book. It's easy to get, very affordable. So that's one. Like if I'm just going to get one book, right? Derek
yeah,
and Daryl haven't convinced me to buy all these books, or even they're what they call the definitive account. They haven't convinced me. Well, this would be something that's very affordable and
yeah.
and,
You can
and
whet
a
someone's
solidly
appetite.
written book.
Yeah,
Yeah, solidly written book. I got a couple oddballs here. I'll also talk about. This one is I don't you can't get it in print anymore, but you can definitely see it from time to time in aftermarket. And that is David R. Logston. He's done these eyewitness series books. So
oh
he's
yeah,
got
yep,
Perryville and I think
yeah, the
Stones
Shiloh,
River
yeah,
and he had one, of course, on Fort Donelson. I like these books a lot because it really does give you soldier perspective. That's what they are. These are quotes
mhm,
from the folks that were there. That's what the
yeah,
whole series is. He'll weave a little bit of a tale in it, but it's mostly letting those guys tell the story.
mhm,
Um, so it's pretty cool. Actually, this one looks relatively new. I wonder if I bought this newer because it's in great shape and it has a Kentucky State Park sticker on it for $17. So,
hmm,
but these aren't in print. I think it was Kettle Mills Press. I think it was like a local press, Kettle Mills Press down in Nashville. So I think it's either his own press or something local.
yeah,
But it's kind of cool if you like a bunch of first person accounts.
yeah. I
Um,
enjoy those for the one I got is
yeah,
Shiloh, and it's good. When I
yeah,
took my
it-
busload of kids down there one time, that's I used that quite a bit when we went to the different
yeah.
stops.
Yeah, absolutely. Give them a little perspective from the first
Yeah,
person account. Douglas L. Gifford put together a Fort Donelson battlefield tour guide. I mentioned here because he does take you to a few different places that you wouldn't necessarily go if you just do the Fort Donelson current tour guide.
mhm,
It's a good effort. I'm not a fan of the maps. Got to be honest with you, but it's self-published.
yeah,
So, you're going to get what you get from that. But it's about 100 pages, 82 pages altogether. Major Gifford I think he's retired now. U.S. Army, I do believe. So it's okay. Like if you want a tour book, right? But he goes into a lot of things too. It's got an order battle and some different things in there.
mhm,
Again, the maps are. It looks like the maps are kind of created on a 9 dot uh, pixel
yeah.
printer or something. So, one second. Excuse me as I cough right in the middle of that. I couldn't get to the mute button fast enough. But it's you can pick it up. I think I got mine through Amazon or eBay or something. But if you want to take a tour guide, it's got like 20 different tour stops, and almost all of them are around the town of Dover, where
Mhm,
Fort Donelson's located. There is one tour stop or a couple stops outside, but for the most part. And then the last one, I know I'm forgetting something else that I have, but um, of course, I got the old Ed Bars,
oh yeah,
Battle
yeah,
Fort Henry,
yeah,
Battle Fort Donelson.
yeah,
I have those, but those are a little harder to pick up. I have one that I like the book, but well, I like the writing of this book, but I don't understand. I guess I don't understand the premise, and maybe I'm just being daft. It's called Men of Fire. It is a good book. Grant Forrest and the campaign that decided the Civil War. It's Jack Hurst, and again, I like the book, so I want to make sure we got that clear. It is fairly recent publication. So it focuses mostly on Grant and Forrest during the Fort Donelson campaign, which I found that to be an interesting selection. I guess if you want to make sure the book sells, take two of the more popular names during the war and put them together into a book. And I'm not saying he did that intentionally to sell books. 2007 by Basic Books. It's a page one. It is 440 pages
Oh, wow.
altogether. Yeah, so it's a thick book. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good sized book. I think I would have enjoyed this more. I get Grant's side of it, right? Grant, I would have liked to see Grant and then the five brigadier generals on the Confederate side as a
Hmm.
comparison and contrast. Probably wouldn't have been nearly as interesting, and probably would not have sold as many books. To be blatantly honest with you, because I'm going to be blatantly honest with you. I do believe that Lieutenant Colonel Forrest plays a fairly minor-ish role at the battle. I mean, he does some good work, but he's leading basically an oversized,
He's not
well,
making
an
the.
undersized Confederate brigade, or cavalry brigade. But for the most part, it's just a few regiments and some detachments and squadrons and whatnot.
Yeah, he's not making the
You
decision.
know, yeah, he's
Yeah.
not making the command decisions. He's repeatedly charging on the breakout, which is cool. He leads about 800 men, and they leave, of course, before the
Hmm.
surrender. So all the stories are really kind of cool. But the comparison between these two men, I think, really carry on later into the war and their impact in the Western theater as a whole.
Hmm.
But I found it to be, I mean, it's a good book. I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
I restate that about 8 times. That is a good book. But I would have liked the premise to be more of Grant and then the Groucho Marx brothers on the other side of the wall. So that time I did get to the mute button, so that was good. So it's good. Like I said, it's different. If you're a Forrest guy, if you're a Grant guy, you're going to buy that book.
Yeah.
That's something to look into um, as another title. There's some other oddball things that I've picked up, but from a book perspective, that's mostly. I think I've covered everything that I pretty much have that I would recommend
Yeah.
for people to pick up. Any other thoughts that you might have?
No. Get to the battlefield. Walk the
Yeah,
ground, and check out the Dudley Hill area. I mean that
sure.
land that they've gotten for the breakout. It's being able to visit that place. You'll be the only one there if you go. I mean,
Oh,
no one's going to be in
yeah.
that area, and so
Nope.
definitely check that out. Everyone's down at the water batteries. If you go
Yes.
go to these breakout areas, these the outer works, definitely check those out.
Yeah. And Doug Gifford in his book, it was written before I think Dudley Hill was preserved,
Hmm.
but it'll get you right there at the end of the New Forge Road and where the
Yeah,
old Forge Road used to go.
yeah.
That's the right where that gate is. That if you go through that gate, that's part of the Dudley Hill complex, and that's part of where MacArthur's brigade would deploy
Hmm.
and be
And
attacked
then get chewed
on the
up.
15th. Now, there's a lot more ground to be saved down there, but they have a lot more ground also in the process or has been saved. It's not really accessible. It's not interpreted. There's not trails
And there's a lot of
that
just
will do the,
houses,
yeah,
and like just
yeah,
people's
there's some
houses.
houses
Yeah.
and just not the easiest thing to necessarily tour some of that area. Hopefully, I guarantee there's probably in their strategic plan to get that ground opened up and interpreted somehow.
Hmm.
But it's all about budgets and
Yep.
and priorities and how many people that can we hire and how do we patrol it for safety
Right.
and that sort of thing. So we don't often think about that when it comes to battlefields. So all those considerations have to be taken in place. But I will echo what you said there, Derek. Get down there,
Yep.
right? Go see it. Dover's a small little town, but you got Clarksville, Tennessee, about 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes to the east. You got Paris, Tennessee, about the same distance to the west. They have chain hotels. Murray, Kentucky has got a couple hotel options and plenty of places to
Hmm.
eat and drink. Dover's got some nice little mom and pop restaurants. Um, there is a hotel there. It's a Dover Inn and Cabins or something like that.
Not the one
I
that.
just stayed there. That's yeah, in Dover.
Not
I just
the.
stayed there back in February, and it's haggard.
Hmm.
It is worn.
Yeah.
Not to disparage them, but it is super convenient.
Yep.
because it is just down the road from the main entrance of the park. But yeah, get down there, spend some time. There's a little bit you can do a little bit over at Henry if you know where to go.
Hmm.
That's always a challenge as well.
Those
Ask the
artworks are pretty
park
cool too.
rangers. Yeah, ask the park rangers where the interpretive panel is. Unfortunately, though, they had that storm come through a few years ago and
Yeah.
knocked down a ton of trees. And so when I had that tour down there, we literally scrambled. That English couple wanted to go out there, and we
Yeah.
went out there, and it took us like an hour to go out and back, and it's only a few hundred yards.
Yeah.
So it was crazy. And then Fort Hyman,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
You can get to
that's really
Fort
cool.
Hyman. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can get to that ground now, so it's really cool.
Yeah. I remember that the time we went there, the storm had just passed and those trees were down all over the road. And we ended up having to walk big portion of that. Couldn't get vehicles up there because so many trees down, and they were in the process of
Yeah.
chainsawing all those up. But yeah, that's
Hmm.
seeing those works. That was really cool too. That's the only time I'd ever been to Hyman, and I'd really like to go back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know a guy,
Yeah,
or a few guys,
yeah,
Maybe we'll put together another tour down there
yeah,
someday.
yeah,
Sounds good. Well, we got to get Greg Biggs involved with it too, because
yeah.
we got to do the. I'm going to say Cairo because I'm sorry, it's Cairo, Egypt. By God, that's what I'm going to say. No, we got to get to Cairo and Columbus and do it upright, right?
Yeah.
Do a multi-day tour and do it upright and
The whole campaign.
get him involved and yeah. But yeah, enjoyed it, right? Like I think you got a title or two you need to pick up,
Hmm.
and I know I need to get the
Yeah.
Hamilton book before everybody else goes out there and starts buying it up. So driving up that price.
Get it while you
So I'm
can.
gonna get out there and get my copy of it. But I hope everybody enjoyed, just us bantering back and forth about books, and maybe it gives you a little bit of idea what you can pick up, what's available out there, and what we think are the worthy efforts.
Yep.
And again to recap, if you're going to go deep dive and you want the definitive account, that is Tim Smith's book,
Yeah. Second
without a
up.
doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. You don't even have to tell him we said that. So without a doubt. So, well, anything else before we play the outro music and
I don't think
call
so.
it a night?
I
All
think that's
right.
it. And
All right.
we've got more stuff coming for you guys. So stay tuned for next week and see what pops up.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you all for listening. See ya.